I'm Catherine Van Boskirk, and we at All In Unlimited are privileged today to have Cynthia Hodge speak. She has a graduate degree in psychology, more than 30 years professional work, including direct clinical service, community response to trauma, suicide prevention and intervention, training, and leadership, mentorship, in county, state, national, and international roles and organizations. Cindy led a crisis team responding to the Columbine High School, where she learned some of the challenges. This was 20 years ago. Learned some of the challenges in leading during times of uncertainty and without a roadmap. She also came to appreciate the value and importance of teams in the variety of ways that they can show up, particularly in crises. Since that time, she has built and led teams in 23 countries worldwide. So Cindy, let us know something about leadership today.
Thanks, Catherine. Well, I think leadership is such a big topic right now for a host of reasons. And I've been thinking about this topic for weeks and weeks during this COVID-19 pandemic and all the ways that leaders are challenged. And there's a couple of different ways I think about leadership. One is sort of the leaders who are designated because they were hired or elected or appointed to be in charge of something. And those leaders, a shout out to them and their work in trying to navigate something that no one's ever done before. I think back during Columbine, which was quite a long time ago, but there was some sense of trying to figure out how to respond and kind of map things out and be successful and stay reasonably healthy and well yourself when there was no real guidance about exactly how things would turn out. So I appreciate those leaders and wish them to be surrounded by teams that can help, because even really good leaders only have so much brain power and so much energy. So I think we're naturally drawn to look to leaders for answers. I mean, that we're designed that way. I mean, human nature means when we feel uncertain, unsure, confused, kind of untethered in some way, that we look to leaders for answers. If you've ever seen kids playing together, young kids playing together somewhere, and they go back and find an adult that they feel safe with, just touch base, just to make sure when they're exploring new things that everything is still kind of okay. The challenge, of course, right now during this global pandemic is that although there are many leaders that have some information and some expertise that we can learn from, nobody really has the full roadmap about what this looks like. I've had lots of conversations with people who, are starting to ask questions, as I have, which is, when they talk about our new normal, well, what does that mean exactly? Because exactly is kind of what we're hoping for. Exactly gives us something to kind of hold on to and feel some comfort in it. And there's not really an exact answer. And that is really starting to weigh on people and is starting to weigh on our ability to kind of make day-to-day decisions, because people just keep wanting to know, well, what's next? When's next? What does that mean? What does it look like? What does it mean for me, for my family, in my community, in my state, in my country? I mean, the questions are being asked all over the world. So I think what I'd switch gears a little bit to focus on has to do with this idea that think about leaders, think about what leaders you've had in your life and why you picked them. Often people have really clear ideas about people that have been leaders for them in their life and why that was the case. And whether it was a high school teacher or a supervisor or someone in their faith community or their neighborhood, there seems to be a pretty consistent set of ideas about what makes people feel supported by leaders. So consistency, clear communication, ability to prioritize things and make good decisions based on thoughtful, considered outcome possibilities. Feeling like people get support and credit and are recognized for the efforts that they're making. And I think that that's true no matter where you find leaders. So those could be designated leaders. Those could also be leaders that came to you in your life in ways that were not sort of designated, but you still viewed them really as strong leaders. And I think what I would encourage people to take on the challenge is that right now we have to be our own leaders in many respects. It would be nice if we could look to leaders outside of us and they could give us great, wonderful, planned out answers. And I think we could make ourselves a little bit unsettled or quite frustrated or anxious by wishing that we could do that. Not to say that people outside of us don't have information that's important. I think that's been one of the challenges, has been there's a lot of information coming from a lot of places that normally we would think of as sort of experts. But even the experts can't really agree on everything, which doesn't create a ton of comfort or faith for me, because then I'm left, like everyone right now, left to figure out, okay, what information will I listen to? What information will I seek out? What information will help me make decisions in my own life? Because really, we're all sort of leading or following all the time. And I feel like it's a pretty fluid thing, even in the course of a day. Maybe I'm leading in my house because I have to decide how and when to go to the grocery store, and what that means and where I go, and do I need to have a mask, and do I have a list, and can I go at a time that's appropriate so that I'm acknowledging the vulnerable populations and all of those things. I might do that. Sometime later in the day, I might be asking for technological assistance from my teenager, in which case then I'm for sure following. I am not leading in those discussions. So I see it as a fluid thing, but that there is accountability in leadership. And, I'm accountable in my family. People are accountable in their neighborhoods, in their communities. And people are stepping up to lead in unexpected kinds of ways. Trying to think of a great example. In my neighborhood, it happens to be that people are sharing responsibilities for our older neighbors to get them groceries. Now, 6 months ago, I wasn't offering to get my older neighbors groceries because it wasn't needed 6 months ago. But now there is an opportunity to lead that's different than before. And so I do think we have an opportunity individually to decide, can we take on some of those same characteristics of the leaders that we admire or that we look up to during a time when we don't have all the answers? Is that making some sense?
Yes, the accountability part, I don't often think about myself as a leader and being accountable, but that's an important idea. I think that, and you said no one has a full roadmap, right? So I'm exploring the kind of leader I am when I'm leading without even knowing it. So that's helpful.
I think the idea that we're accountable for our decisions is more or less comfortable for people. I think that some people feel more accountable more of the time for more people. And maybe that has guided other kinds of decisions, like where they live or the jobs they have and things like that. But to think that we are somehow not accountable for the choices that we're making right now, I think misses the point, because since no one has a roadmap, how could anybody be accountable but me for my own choices? And I hear people, I mean, I've heard some people say how frustrated they are because people are asking them questions all the time about, are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? And the answer keeps being, well, I don't know. Well, I don't know. Well, I don't know. Let me see what information comes out today. And I think the flexibility currently required for leading in ourselves and in our lives and our communities is remarkable. I mean, an amount of flexibility that I don't know that I've ever experienced, and certainly not watched everybody experience at the same time. There's an author that I like, Robin Sharma, has a quote that was, let me just be sure I get it right. Anyone can lead when the plan is working. The best lead when the plan falls apart. And what struck me about that particular quote, there's lots of quotes about leaders are born out of crisis and good leaders show up in crisis and things like that. But what stood out about that quote was all the plans have fallen apart. Not just the plan, it's every plan. So there's all the plans about vacations and working and health and travel and economy and all over the world, all the plans have fallen apart. And so how are we going to rise up in the sense of navigating through this in a way that's kind to ourselves, at the very least, kind to ourselves? Because just like really good leaders who are designated have a certain amount of energy and are accountable to people, so do we only have a certain amount of energy and are accountable in our own lives for our choices, in our families and things like that. And, you know, I heard a term recently, which I had not heard before, but made perfect sense to me, called decision fatigue. And it really has to do with this idea that decision fatigue in and of itself has to do with our decisions becoming less good as we go because we have so many of them to make. But I sort of think of decision fatigue in my understanding initially was why we're tired during this time. Because so many regular kinds of decisions take up a lot more energy than they did before. And so there's only so many decisions people can make thoughtfully in any given day. And so sometimes decisions that we wouldn't think about at all before, like where to pick up dinner, let's say, or is there enough, you know, fruits and vegetables and meats available in our town or community, we wouldn't normally think about that. And so that's taking up some of the brain power we have. So maybe we're not fatiguing and making bad decisions, but maybe we're just tired because the kinds of things taking our energy are just so different than before. I think that this is the third in our series of sort of podcasts during the COVID-19 pandemic, and there seems to be a really common theme going on here in all of them, which has to do with some grace and self-compassion. You know, if something small feels like it's overwhelming, instead of feeling frustrated with myself, and I do it to myself too, but instead of all of us feeling frustrated, to recognize the amount of time and energy we're spending on things that we never used to even have to think about in many regards. And there's limited resources. I mean, I certainly learned that during Columbine in that response, which is no matter how invested you are and how thoughtful you are and how compassionate you are and how much you want to understand and get information, there are limits to what you can reasonably do. And certainly day in and day out. And we are so many days now into this pandemic. And although there seems to be glimmers of hope along this roadmap that's getting created, you know, when you say we're working back to the new normal, still nobody has an answer for that. And every day, then, you know, you kind of look at the information and make the best choices you can and be kind to yourself if you have a misstep. I mean, accountability is important. I mean, I really do believe in accountability, especially if you're leading. And if I'm leading myself, I have to give myself a little bit of latitude if I have a misstep in what I decide, because the information is coming so fast and furious. I can't always make the best decision. Does that Is that ringing true around accountability and
Yeah,
kind of right now what we have to be doing for ourselves?
sounds like you're asking us to have a balance between making sure we are accountable and at the same time being compassionate about our humanity, about when we get stressed, and allow ourselves missteps.
Absolutely, because people are and I think maybe the flexibility and grace that everybody has their own set of things they're trying to balance out. If you're trying to balance out whether you can pay your rent or whether you can buy groceries because you've been laid off, that's kind of that's a no-win really situation. And yet as a leader in your life, you still have to make a choice there because there are limited resources. And so that's just the reality of trying to lead as gracefully and thoughtfully as we can, which is what we'd like to see from other leaders outside of us. Can we bring those same characteristics inside and say, okay, I look up to leaders who are thoughtful and take into account information and have a goal in mind, that, the ultimate goal in mind that they're trying to work towards. And what is my goal? And how do I make that work? And be nice to ourselves along the way, because nobody knows all the steps on this one.
Sounds like your dog is agreeing with you
My
there.
dog is agreeing and maybe wanting some leadership to let them outside, perhaps. I'll hand that off to someone else for right now.
Okay.
Anything else that could be helpful?
Yes, I'm wondering what you think is maybe the most important thing, if you could say one thing about leading.
One thing about leading. Well, I think that there are lots of important things about leading. If I was going to say leading ourselves, which is what I really feel like we have some influence over now, and I think people having influence over something right now could feel really comforting. So we do have some influence over this. And that is, can we think about leaders we identify outside of us and the things that they do that help us feel comforted and secure and supported? And can we translate that somehow into the things that we're doing daily in our own lives, in our own decision making?
That's terrific. That's very helpful. Yeah.
Great. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Yeah, thank you. More soon.